Hey! Hi, how you doing? This is Ryan, and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. So for today's video, I'm doing something that I think will be a lot of fun, and it will help us get to know each other a bit better, and help me get to know myself a bit better. Let's take a trip down memory lane with what memories I still have. No thanks to the severe memory loss and amnesia. I want to look back at my past 6, technically 5, years of gaming by reviewing, analyzing, and discussing what were my favorite video games that came out this last half-decade. Using my top 10 games of the year lists and videos, I want to see if we can deduce any patterns, any outliers, any eccentricities. Am I consistent in what kinds of games I prefer, or have my tastes changed over the years? I'm curious to find out, and I hope you are too. So, let's begin. Let's dissect me as a gamer. We'll be going over what were my top 10 favorite games of the years 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2021. There's no top 10 list for 2020 because I barely played any of the new games that released in 2020, but if you're truly curious, I'd say at the very least my 2 favorite games from the year 2020 would be Doom Eternal and Otherside. Maybe we'll dig deeper into this later on, we'll see. So, let's begin. Starting off with my top 10 favorite video games of 2016. Here they are. And as we see here, my top 3 favorite games of 2016 were Dark Souls 3, Titanfall 2, and Doom. Now immediately, what I find so interesting about my top 10 favorite games of 2016 is that they're all AAA video games. There's not a single indie or AA middle market game here. Whereas with all my other top 10 favorites lists, they all have a few indies and AA middle market games on there. 2016 is the only year where all my favorite games were AAA. Another curious and unique aspect about my favorite games of 2016 is that Deus Ex: Mankind Divided was the only game in my top 10 and was one of my favorites of the year, primarily for its story. Don't get me wrong, I still really love the gameplay of Deus Ex: Mankind Divided, but it was its mixture of story and gameplay that made it one of my favorites, whereas all the other games from 2016 that I loved primarily because of the gameplay. Sure, I liked the stories of Dishonored 2 and Watch Dogs 2. Hell, I'll even throw Gears of War 4 on there, but it was mostly the gameplay that made me love those games and put those games on my top 10 list. I find it so interesting that my favorite games of 2016 were all mostly gameplay focused and AAA. Just looking at my top 3 favorite games, Dark Souls 3, Titanfall 2, and Doom, all AAA, all gameplay focused. With Dark Souls 3, I loved the boss battles, exploring the environments, collecting and using new weapons and armor, listening to that amazing soundtrack. God damn it, Dark Souls 3 is such an amazing game. And then we have Titanfall 2. Love that game for its gunplay, its movement, its parkour systems, living out mech battle fantasies with the Titans, phenomenal single-player campaign, and a PvP multiplayer that I actually really enjoy. And I am not a PvP multiplayer person. I prefer single-player and co-op. Then we have Doom. Doom 2016, one of my favorite video games of all time, one of my favorite first-person shooters of all time. A perfect, action-packed, single-player campaign. A fun, old-school multiplayer with bot support, and of course the endless player-created content of Snap Map. God, I fucking love Doom 2016 so much. So much! Yeah, years later and my mind has not changed. Doom 2016 is absolutely my favorite game of 2016 and one of my favorite games of all time. Alright, moving on to 2017. Here are my top 10 favorite games of 2017. And as you can immediately tell, as you can immediately see, there are some indie and middle market games on here, with a mixture of different AAA video games. But my number 1 favorite video game of 2017 was an indie middle market game, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, and that game was my number 1 mostly because of its story and the unique visual and gameplay experiences the game has to offer. Although I did enjoy the combat gameplay of Senua quite a bit, and it has some super cool and creative puzzles, but the primary reason Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice was my game of the year 2017 was because of the main character Senua and her personal journey that you follow her on throughout the game and just the overall story and themes of the game. The game is just so emotionally impactful, and it it emotionally impacted me so hard that it was my #1 favorite game of 2017. But looking at my top 3 as a whole, we have Middle-earth, Shadow of War, For Honor, and Hellblade. With Shadow of War, I absolutely love that game, and it was one of my favorites of the year because of its combat, its mechanics, and systems. Shadow of War as a gameplay experience is just so engaging to me and enthralling and addictive. Oh, and the scope and scale of the game and its set pieces, it's a medieval fantasy war dream come true. Speaking of dreams come true, we have my second favorite game of 2017, For Honor, one of the most unique and creative games Ubisoft has ever released. The premise? Knights versus Vikings versus Samurai. It's such a badass and silly, childlike dream come true. I can't not adore For Honor for its premise alone. As a gameplay experience, there really is nothing else like For Honor, a mixture of third-person hack and slash and fighting games? The melee combat in For Honor just looks and feels so damn good, and there's so much content in this game, and For Honor is legitimately one of the best live service video games on the market. It's constantly and consistently updated with new content, whether that's playable characters, maps, game modes, special events, cosmetics, you name it, there is always something to do and or unlock in For Honor. It's one of the reasons I've been playing the game still to this day since 2017. I love For Honor. Now back to looking at the top 10 list as a whole, like I said earlier, it's nice to see a mix of AAA and indie games here, but it's also nice to see a mix of games that are here on the list and were my favorite games of 2017 because of a mixture of loving both the gameplay experiences and the stories of these games. Nioh, love that for the gameplay, Resident Evil 7, gameplay, Prey, story and gameplay, Echo, story and gameplay, Little Nightmares, story and gameplay, surprisingly enough, The Evil Within, story and gameplay, Wolfenstein 2, story and gameplay, and #1, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, mostly story, but also gameplay. God, I really need to find time to replay some of these games. God, these are some real good ones right here. However, for now, let us move on to my top 10 favorite games of 2018. And here they are. Once again, we have a nice mixture of AAA and indie games, and a nice mixture of games that I loved for both their stories and gameplay. But my top 3 games of 2018 really fascinates me. So we have, for my top 3, Far Cry 5, Monster Hunter World, and Omensight. Now, Omensight as my #1 favorite video game of 2018, I still stand by that. Omensight is a criminally underrated indie game masterpiece with a brilliant story, great characters, and fun combat. And the mechanics and systems of being a detective in a time loop trying to stop an apocalypse, Omensight's so good. Like I said, criminally underrated. Monster Hunter World is my second favorite game of 2018. I also still stand by that. As a matter of fact, my opinion of Monster Hunter World has only gotten even higher. I love Monster Hunter World even more thanks to the Iceborne expansion. I'll go as far to say Monster Hunter World has become one of my favorite video games of all time, period, and is easily one of the best live service video games out there as well. It's a fun, amazing experience to play in single player, but it's an absolute riot, an absolute blast to play in co-op with your friends. If only I could get more of my friends to play Monster Hunter World with me. Alas. But then we have my third favorite game of 2018, Far Cry 5, which actually surprises me. Because there's other games here on my top 10 of 2018 that are just games that you could possibly argue are objectively better than Far Cry 5, like Ni no Kuni 2, or Vermintide 2, or Vampire, or Gris. I think there's a lot of fair arguments that could be made that there were better games that came out in 2018 that could surpass Far Cry 5, but I'll be damned. There's something about Far Cry 5 that I find just so much fun to play, and there's something about the game's world and characters that I just find so charming, interesting, memorable, and in some cases, even relatable? And I'll be damned yet again, I also love the music of Far Cry 5. It's so well done and fits the atmosphere and themes so well. Far Cry 5 is an open-world first-person shooter in a sea of open-world first-person shooters, and yet there's something about Far Cry 5 that I just find so compelling and so entertaining. I really wish I could articulate and pin down the secret sauce of Far Cry 5 that that makes me love it so much and made me put it in my top 3 games of 2018. There's something about Far Cry 5, man. But yeah, those are my top 10 favorite games of 2018. A nice mix of different games and different genres, and I love them for different reasons, whether it be story or gameplay. But now let's move on to one of my favorite years in gaming ever, 2019. God, I loved 2019 in gaming. There were so many great games. I had so much fun that year. As we can see here, looking at my top 10 of 2019, a lot of my favorite video game franchises got sequels, which were all excellent additions to their respective series. The Division 2, Mortal Kombat 11, Gears 5, Devil May Cry 5, Borderlands 3, Metro Exodus. But there were also a few new IPs, and more specifically indie games that came out in 2019 that I absolutely adored, like Dauntless, A Plague Tale: Innocence, Control, and oh boy, Remnant from the Ashes. Remnant from the Ashes, my #1 favorite video game of 2019 and one of my favorite video games of all time. Indie, middle market game, can be played single player or co-op. It's such a blast to play in co-op with friends. Some of the best boss battles that I've ever experienced in a video game. So much replayability, so much awesome loot to collect in terms of weapons and armor, the build crafting, oh my god, the crazy ass builds you can make. Phenomenal epic music, a unique take on a post-apocalyptic fantasy world. If you have not played Remnant from the Ashes, you are doing yourself a disservice, you are committing a crime against humanity in yourself. Play Remnant from the Ashes. So good! Now, taking a step back and looking at my overall top 3 favorite games of 2019, we have Metro Exodus, Control, and Remnant from the Ashes. Control being my second favorite game of 2019, I still stand by that. Yet another phenomenal video game, product, and work of art, I dare say a modern classic. Every aspect of the game is quality. It was made with passion. It was meticulously designed. Story, characters, visuals, graphics, gameplay, level design, audio, music, it's all so good. This is yet another game that if you have not played Control, you are doing yourself a disservice. You are missing out on a great experience. And while I am admittedly fond of the story and characters and the overall world and lore, Control is still a game I would say I primarily love for its gameplay, and that it was my second favorite video game of 2019 because of its gameplay, but all its other aspects and elements also aided a great deal. Then we have my third favorite game of 2019, Metro Exodus, which, full transparency here, picking my top 5 favorite games of 2019 was an absolute bastard. I remember debating with myself for the longest time what games would be in my top 5. I knew Remnant would be there, I knew Control would be there, and I probably knew Remnant and Control would be my #1 and #2. But for 5, 4, and 3, it was actually a 4-way battle between Gears 5, Devil May Cry 5, Borderlands 3, and Metro Exodus. I loved all 4 of those games so much, so putting them in a specific order, determining which ones I truly liked more than the other, oh god. Pain and suffering. But in the end, Metro Exodus came out on top as my third favorite game of 2019, not because of its gameplay, but because of its story and characters. The story, the characters, the set-piece moments? Metro Exodus is just such an engrossing video game, with such a well-fleshed out and highly detailed post-apocalyptic world. And the game is just so immersive. I'd argue one of the most immersive video games of all time ever made. Play the Metro games, play the Metro trilogy. It's such a fantastic series of games. Now, looking at my top 10 list of 2019 as a whole, there are a few things that stick out to me about this list. First off, quite a few live services. Dauntless, The Division 2, Mortal Kombat 11, Gears 5, Borderlands 3, all of them could be categorized as live services. There's also quite a few of these games, quite a few of these very same games, that I loved and really enjoyed and were some of my favorite games of 2019 because of their progression systems. In these games, I loved unlocking shit, collecting shit, and upgrading my character to become more powerful. Dauntless, The Division 2, Mortal Kombat 11, Gears 5, Borderlands 3, and my #1 game, Remnant from the Ashes. Just something I find very interesting, especially when you go and compare my past top 10 favorite games. There were a few selections where it was partially because of their progression systems that I really enjoyed those games, but in 2019, it was the majority. Again, just something interesting I noticed and something to think about. Another interesting fact, specifically concerning these last 3 years of top 10 lists and favorite games, is that my number one favorite game in 2017, 2018, and 2019, they were all indie middle market games, not AAA video games. And my only number one favorite games of any particular year that break this trend are Doom 2016 in 2016 and Doom Eternal in 2020, because once we move to 2021, my top 10 favorite games of 2021, yet again, my favorite game of the year was an indie middle market game. The new Doom games seem to be the only exception to the trend that I end up preferring, and my favorite game of the year being an indie middle market game. One that is usually criminally underrated by the majority of the gaming and online community. And people wonder why I love video games so much and why I'm having so much fun playing video games and I'm so frustrated with the online gaming community. They're all bitching about AAA games, and I'm here playing all these awesome indie middle market games and having a great time. I'm curious what this says about me. Anyways, here are my top 10 favorite games of last year, 2021. Once again, we have a nice mix of AAA video games and indie AA middle market games. Ooh, as a matter of fact, an interesting fact, most of the games on this top 10 list, which is actually technically a top 12 or 13 list when you think about it, most of these games are in fact indie AA middle market games. There are more indie AA middle market games on this list than AAA games. We've got Aliens Fireteam Elite, Lost in Random, Little Nightmares 2, Solar Ash, Pray for the Gods, Grime, and my number one favorite game of 2021, Kena Bridge of Spirits. And if we look at my top 3 favorite games of 2021 as a whole, 2 out of 3 of them are indie middle market games. So for my top 3, we have number 3, Grime, one of the best video games ever made, a masterpiece, a perfect video game, a Metroidvania Souls-like that is disgustingly underrated. Love this game, adore this game, phenomenal boss battles, spectacular music, combat, platforming, and puzzle solving is all so satisfying, and the game's premise, setting, its world, its lore is also original and creative, like truly original. I cannot find any fantasy fiction that compares to Grime. Grime is so good. It's so fucking good. Anyways, then we have my second favorite game of 2021, Outriders. Now this game, the internet is split 50-50 on. When looking at all my other top 3 favorite games in their respective years, I think it's a fair argument to make that a lot of people could understand or even agree with my choices, but Outriders, I know that's a contentious game online. Don't misunderstand me. The launch of Outriders, the release debut, was a fucking disaster. An unacceptable mess. The co-op multiplayer was unplayable for weeks. And then there was that infamous bug that deleted people's inventories. Yikes! Outriders launch was bad. There's no denying that. But once it got patches and updates, once it fixed its issues, I'd argue to this day that Outriders is a pretty great video game. And for me personally, I really love it. I really enjoy it. I find it so much fun to play. The customization is fantastic. The loot grind is satisfying and addicting. Combat just looks so cool and is so chaotic, and it just feels so satisfying and empowering to kill enemies in this game. Outriders just clicks with me. I'm willing to admit that Outriders being one of my favorite games of the year 2021 was mostly rooted in personal subjective taste rather than overall objective quality. Whereas my number one favorite video game of 2021, Kena Bridge of Spirits, is objectively one of the best video games of all time ever made, period, full stop. Kena is just such an exceptionally designed game. Sure, that design may be classical and obviously inspired by Legend of Zelda games, but it's still exceptionally designed nonetheless. A powerful story with memorable characters, satisfying, challenging, surprisingly deep combat, fun and fluid platforming and puzzle solving, and sweet mother of Mary, the graphics and the music. This is one of the most beautiful looking games and one of the most beautiful sounding games that you could see and hear ever. Kena Bridge of Spirits is a masterpiece, criminally underrated. Everyone should play this game. God, man. I fucking loved 2021 in gaming. It's one of the reasons I got so pissed and defensive at the gaming community when they kept saying, oh, 2021 sucks in gaming. Oh, there were no good games in 2021. You dishonest fucking troglodytes. We got games like Kena Bridge of Spirits, Grime, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, Solar Ash, Little Nightmares 2, Resident Evil Village, Lost in Random, and you wanna fucking lie to my face and tell me there were no good games in 2021, that 2021 sucked for gaming? No, you're just an idiot. You're a fool who didn't play any of the good games that came out that year. I'm sorry, going on a tangent. You know me, I get very passionate about this shit. I despise when the accomplishments of talented and hardworking video game developers is just so frivolously dismissed. Anyways, as we can see in my top 10 favorite games of 2021, there was a nice mix of games I loved for gameplay and story. My number one favorite game, Kena, was mostly because of its story, alongside my other personal picks, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, Solar Ash, Little Nightmares 2, Lost in Random. But there's a decent chunk of games here that I did love and were my favorite games of 2021 primarily because of the gameplay, like Back 4 Blood, Aliens Fireteam Elite, Halo Infinite, Resident Evil Village, Pray for the Gods, Grime, and Outriders. Another interesting consistency and pattern I see in this particular top 10 is that the majority of these games, with the exceptions being Back 4 Blood, Aliens, and Little Nightmares 2, most of these games, a standout feature of them that I really enjoyed were their boss battles. Hell, Solar Ash and Pray for the Gods, two games that are inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, are mostly about their boss battles. Resident Evil Village and Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy had some great bosses that were just great narrative-wise and visual set-piece-wise, while Grime and Kena Bridge of Spirits just had boss battles that were so great from a challenging gameplay perspective. Just something I noticed and really interested me. And there we have it. There are all of my top 10 favorite video games of the past few years. So, what have we learned about me as a gamer? Well, I mostly prefer sci-fi and fantasy. I'm really big on single player and PvE. It seems my favorite video game of any particular year ends up being a underrated indie AA middle market game with the exception of AAA games like Doom. And while I sure do enjoy a good, powerful, emotional story, I seem to be mostly drawn to video games with melee or shooter combat. For now, that's what I've gathered so far looking back at all of my top 10 favorite games of the past few years. So now, let me know in the comment section down below, what do all of these games say about me? What are your speculations, opinions, and conclusions? What kind of gamer am I? What kind of personality am I? What kind of person am I? I am fascinated and excited to get your feedback on this video. Please let me know in the comment section down below. Anyways, that's been a video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did indeed enjoy the video, if you liked the video, then please hit the like button, share the video on social media, Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook, and if you want to help out and support me directly, please consider making a YouTube Super Thanks donation or donating via my Buy Me a Coffee page in the description down below. Anyways, once again, that's been a video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all later.